You want to spend the next 20 years scraping drunks off the pavement for Captain Elena Thorpe's amusement? Or do you want to retire to a beach in Bora Bora with a duffel bag full of untraceable hundreds? In the passenger seat, Officer Caleb Dunn stared out the window, his stomach churning with a nauseating mix of dread and guilt. Caleb was 26, a relatively new transfer to the precinct, and he was already drowning in the deep, corrupt waters Vance had dragged him into. Caleb had a mountain of medical debt from his wife's complicated pregnancy, a fact Vance had weaponized with masterclass manipulation. "Vance, look at that place," Caleb pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. He wiped the condensation from the glass with a trembling, gloved hand. The house was a sprawling masterpiece of dark slate, reinforced glass, and brutalist concrete angles. It looked less like a suburban home and more like a modern art museum. "That's a $10 million property. The guy who owns it, Malcolm Whitaker. He's not some street-level dealer we can just roll over." Captain Elena specifically told us to stand down after that incident at the town hall. He's got lawyers, he's got money. If this goes sideways, we don't just lose our badges. We go to federal prison. Vance sneered, the expression twisting his scarred, angular face into a mask of pure, unadulterated arrogance. The mere mention of the town hall incident made his blood boil. 3 months ago, Malcolm Whitaker, a wealthy, articulate black man who had recently moved into the predominantly white, affluent neighborhood, had stood up at a community policing forum. In front of the mayor, the press, and Captain Elena, Malcolm had systematically and calmly dismantled Vance's arrest statistics, exposing a blatant, undeniable pattern of racial profiling and excessive force. Malcolm hadn't yelled. He hadn't lost his temper. He had simply laid out the data with a chilling clinical precision that had left Vance humiliated, reprimanded, and passed over for a promotion he had felt entitled to. From that moment on, Malcolm Whitaker became an obsession. Vance couldn't accept that a black man could possess that level of wealth, poise, and influence without a dark secret. In Vance's twisted, prejudiced worldview, Malcolm had to be dirty. "Elena is a politician, Caleb. She doesn't know what it takes to clean up these streets." Vance spat, reaching into the heavy tactical bag resting on the center console. He pulled out a dark, heavy brick wrapped tightly in layers of duct tape and clear plastic. It was a kilogram of pure uncut fentanyl confiscated from a bus 3 weeks prior and never logged into the evidence room. "And Whitaker is dirty. I got it from a high-level CI. My snitch swore on his mother's grave that Whitaker is moving weight for Joshua's syndicate. He's a money man, a ghost who washes cartel cash through tech startups." Vance leaned closer to Caleb, his eyes wide and feverish. "The CI said there's a floor safe in the master bedroom holding at least $2 million in loose cash. Joshua's cash." "Joshua is distracted right now dealing with federal indictments. He won't even notice the money is gone. We go in. We find the safe. We take the cash. We leave this little package of fentanyl under Whitaker's mattress, and we call it in as an anonymous tip tomorrow morning. Whitaker goes to prison for the rest of his natural life. Joshua loses his money, and we get rich. It's a victimless crime, assuming you don't count the scumbag whose life I'm about to ruin." Caleb swallowed hard, his throat dry despite the dampness of the car. He knew Vance was deeply in debt to local bookies. He knew Vance was desperate, but planting a kilo of fentanyl on an innocent man, a man who had merely embarrassed Vance in public, was a bridge too far. Yet looking at the madness dancing in Vance's eyes, Caleb realized he had no choice. If he backed out now, Vance would likely put a bullet in the back of his head and blame it on a phantom suspect. "What about the security?" Caleb asked weakly, trying to find a logical reason to abort. "A house like that is going to be wired tighter than Fort Knox. Motion sensors, silent alarms, infrared." "I took care of it," Vance said, tapping the side of his head with a smug, self-satisfied grin. "I bought a military-grade signal jammer off a guy I know in Vice. The moment I flip the switch, this entire property drops off the grid. No Wi-Fi, no cellular signals, no outgoing alarm pings. For the next 30 minutes, Malcolm Whitaker's house is a black hole. Nobody can hear him scream." Vance pulled a thick black balaclava over his head, leaving only his cold, predatory eyes exposed. He chambered a round into his Glock 19 with a sharp metallic clack that sounded deafening in the confined space of the vehicle. "Mask up, rookie," Vance ordered, his tone shifting from manipulative partner to authoritative commander. We're going ghost. We get in, we get the cash, we plant the dope, and we vanish. Tonight, I become a very rich man. And Malcolm Whitaker learns what happens when you disrespect the badge. The rain was an absolute deluge as Vance and Caleb slipped from the warmth of the SUV into the freezing, turbulent night. Dressed entirely in unmarked black tactical gear, they looked like phantoms moving across the impeccably manicured lawn. The storm provided the perfect cover, the thunder drowning out the heavy, wet thud of their combat boots against the grass. Vance held a small rectangular black box in his left hand, the signal jammer. A single green light pulsed on its surface, assuring him that a digital dome of silence had fallen over the property. They approached the rear of the house, moving toward a heavy, custom-built steel door that led into the garage and utility rooms. Vance holstered his weapon and pulled out a heavy-duty hydraulic pry bar. He jammed the wedge into the doorframe, muscles straining as he applied immense pressure to break the electronic lock. Inside the house, deep beneath the ground floor, in a subterranean room built with blast-resistant concrete, the atmosphere was entirely different. It was silent, sterile, and terrifyingly calm. Malcolm sat in a high-backed ergonomic chair in front of a sprawling bank of 6 high-definition monitors. The screens bathed his face in a cool blue light. He was dressed in a simple dark gray Henley and black tactical trousers. On the desk beside his keyboard rested a steaming mug of green tea and a fully loaded Sig Sauer P226 resting on a polished mahogany stand. On the center monitor, a thermal imaging feed displayed 2 bright glowing red and orange figures standing at his back door. He watched with a mild, almost academic interest as the larger figure, Vance, struggled with the pry bar. "Overwatch, this is Handler 1. We have mice in the trap." Malcolm spoke softly into the tiny flesh-colored earpiece tucked into his left ear. "Copy that, Handler 1. This is Overwatch." A woman's voice crackled back through the encrypted, hardwired comms line. It was Vanessa, Malcolm's tactical partner, perched on the roof of a commercial building 3 blocks away, behind the scope of an anti-material sniper rifle. "I have visual on the exterior thermal. It's exactly who we thought it was. Officer Vance Keller and his lapdog Dunn. You were right. The bait was irresistible." "Arrogance makes a man predictable, Vanessa," Malcolm replied smoothly, taking a slow sip of his tea. "He thinks his little black market jammer is blocking my signal. He doesn't realize this house is hardwired into a subterranean fiber optic network directly linked to Langley." "Do you want me to initiate lockdown protocols now?" Vanessa asked, her voice tight with professional tension. "I can have federal marshals sweeping the perimeter in exactly 4 minutes." "Negative. Let them inside," Malcolm commanded gently. "I want Keller to cross the threshold. I want him to commit the felony on federal property. Let him plant the evidence. The Department of Justice wants a watertight case against Joshua's payroll cops, and Vance Keller is the kingpin of precinct corruption. If we arrest him outside, he claims he was investigating a prowler. If we arrest him inside with a kilo of fentanyl and his hands in my safe, he belongs to me forever." Malcolm tapped a few keys on his keyboard. With a barely audible electronic sigh, he remotely disengaged the mag locks on the reinforced rear door, just as Vance applied another heave of the pry bar. Outside, Vance stumbled forward as the heavy door suddenly swung open, the lock giving way far easier than he anticipated. He caught his balance, flashing a triumphant, arrogant grin at Caleb through his ski mask. "See, like taking candy from a baby. Let's move." They stepped into the mudroom, the heavy door swinging shut behind them with a soft, ominous click that sounded far too permanent. Caleb immediately felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The air inside the house was perfectly still, climate-controlled to the exact degree, but it felt incredibly heavy. It felt like walking into a bank vault. As Vance moved forward, sweeping his flashlight beam across the pristine, minimalist kitchen, Caleb lingered near the doorway. He reached out to touch the wall. "Vance," Caleb hissed, his voice trembling as he tapped his knuckles against the drywall. It didn't make a hollow sound. It made a dull, heavy thud. "Vance, feel this wall. It's not drywall. There's steel plating behind the plaster. And look at the windows." Caleb shone his light at the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the patio. The glass didn't catch the light like normal panes. It seemed to absorb it, thick and slightly distorted at the edges. That's ballistic glass. 3, maybe 4 inches thick. Vance, this isn't a normal house. This is a bunker. Vance grabbed Caleb by the tactical vest and shoved him hard against the counter. Are you blind or just stupid? Vance snarled quietly, his breath hot and angry. I told you he was moving weight for Joshua. Of course he has a bunker. Joshua's enemies are always looking for his money. This just proves I'm right. Now shut up. Check the downstairs study for the safe and keep your weapon hot. I'm going upstairs to secure the bedroom. Down in the basement vault, Malcolm watched the thermal feed split up. He pressed a button on his desk, opening a comms line to the adjacent panic room. Inside the panic room, a young woman named Sophie was huddled on a cot, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She was shaking violently, her eyes fixed on the reinforced steel door. She was a former accountant for Joshua's syndicate, the star witness in a RICO case that was about to bring down a billion-dollar criminal empire. Sophie. Malcolm's calm, resonant voice piped through the hidden speakers in the ceiling, instantly cutting through her panic. This is Malcolm. I need you to listen to me carefully. 2 armed intruders have entered the ground floor. Do not be alarmed. They are not Joshua's hitmen. They are corrupt local police officers, and they have walked directly into our snare. Sophie let out a sharp, ragged breath. Are they going to find me? She whispered, terrified they could hear her. No, Malcolm assured her, his tone projecting absolute invulnerability. They don't even know this lower level exists. You are behind 3 feet of reinforced concrete and a titanium blast door. Just stay on the cot, put on the noise-canceling headphones, and close your eyes. When you open them, this will all be over. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, watching Vance's glowing thermal signature ascend the main staircase, heading straight for the master bedroom. Malcolm picked up his Sig Sauer, checked the chamber with a smooth, practiced motion, and stood up. Vanessa, Malcolm said into his comms, he's heading for the master suite. I'm moving into position to make contact. Prepare to drop the hammer. Copy that, Vanessa replied, the sound of a heavy bolt racking, sliding across the encrypted channel. You have a green light, Malcolm. Happy hunting. The second floor of the house was a cavernous expanse of dark hardwood, minimalist glass railings, and deep, impenetrable shadows. Vance moved down the hallway with the predatory grace of a man who enjoyed the terror he inflicted. His heart hammered in his chest, a toxic cocktail of adrenaline, greed, and vindictive triumph coursing through his veins. He imagined the look on Malcolm Whitaker's face when he woke up to a gun barrel against his forehead. He imagined the power he would feel, stripping away the wealthy man's dignity. Vance reached the heavy double doors of the master bedroom. He didn't bother checking the handle. He wanted shock and awe. Taking a step back, he raised his heavy combat boot and delivered a shattering, explosive kick directly adjacent to the latch. The door burst inward, the heavy wood slamming violently against the inner wall with a sound like a gunshot. Vance rushed into the room, sweeping his Glock from left to right, his tactical flashlight cutting blinding swaths of white light through the darkness. Police! Do not move! Keep your hands where I can see them! Vance bellowed, his voice echoing fiercely off the high-vaulted ceilings. He aimed his light at the massive California king bed dominating the center of the room. He expected to see Malcolm thrashing beneath the high-thread count sheets, begging for mercy. The bed was perfectly made, empty, pristine. Vance froze. The triumphant adrenaline instantly soured into a spike of genuine confusion. He swept the room. The walk-in closet, the massive ensuite bathroom, nothing. The room was utterly devoid of life. Then a soft, rhythmic sound broke the silence. Clack, clack, clack. Vance whipped his gun and flashlight toward the far corner of the room near the expansive bay windows overlooking the front lawn. Malcolm was sitting at a sleek, glass-topped desk, fully dressed in his dark Henley and tactical trousers. He wasn't cowering. He wasn't reaching for a phone. He was calmly disassembling and cleaning a matte black suppressed submachine gun. The clack was the sound of the heavy metal bolt sliding back and forth under his expert hands. Beside the weapon sat a single glowing tablet displaying a live video feed of Caleb nervously pacing the downstairs kitchen. I said, freeze, you son of a bitch! Vance screamed, stepping forward, leveling his pistol directly at Malcolm's center mass. He tried to project dominance, but Malcolm's absolute lack of surprise or fear was a psychological gut punch. You tracked mud on the Persian rug, Vance, Malcolm remarked casually. He didn't look up from the weapon in his hands. He spoke with the terrifying calm of a man who controlled every atom in the room. And you really need to work on your entry tactics. Kicking a door gives a prepared occupant roughly 2.4 seconds to put a bullet through the fatal funnel. If I were a criminal, you'd be bleeding out on my hardwood right now. Shut your mouth, Vance roared, closing the distance to the desk. He reached into his tactical bag, pulled out the heavy brick of fentanyl, and slammed it down onto the glass desk right next to Malcolm's weapon parts. We got an anonymous tip. Looks like the tip was right. Hands behind your head, Whitaker. Your life as you know it is over. Malcolm finally stopped moving. He slowly set down the cleaning rag, leaned back in his expensive ergonomic chair, and looked up at Vance. His eyes were dark, fathomless pools of absolute authority. A slow, terrifying smile crept across his face. Fentanyl? Malcolm asked, lightly tapping the duct-taped brick with his index finger. A bit heavy-handed, don't you think? I suppose you needed a charge severe enough to ensure I didn't get bail. The sad part is, you actually think you're the predator here. You actually think that little toy jammer in your pocket is blocking my signals? Vance's breath hitched beneath his mask. A cold, slithering sensation of pure panic began to coil in his gut. How did he know about the jammer? Get on the ground now, Vance demanded, but his voice wavered, lacking the iron core of command it held moments before. Let me tell you a story, Officer Keller, Malcolm said softly, interlacing his fingers and resting them on his stomach. 3 months ago, you were humiliated at a town hall. You started digging into my finances. You reached out to your contacts in the underworld, specifically a mid-level lieutenant in Joshua's syndicate named Rico. You asked Rico if he knew me. Rico told you I was washing money for the boss and that I kept millions in a floor safe right here in this room. Beneath the black balaclava, the blood drained entirely from Vance's face. He felt dizzy. The room seemed to tilt. Only he and Rico knew that conversation had taken place. What you didn't know, Malcolm continued, his voice dropping to a deadly, resonant hum, is that Rico was flipped by the FBI 6 months ago. He's a confidential informant for the federal government. We fed him that script. We knew you were dirty, Vance. We knew you were taking bribes from Joshua to look the other way on his shipments. We just needed you to commit a major felony on tape so we could pressure you into rolling on your precinct captain, Elena, who we know is taking a cut. Malcolm reached out and tapped the screen of the tablet on his desk. Instantly, the entire house underwent a terrifying transformation. Heavy, half-inch thick steel shutters slammed down over the bedroom windows with a deafening, mechanized crash, plunging the room into darkness. A second later, the room was bathed in the blood-red glow of emergency tactical lighting. The heavy wooden bedroom door that Vance had kicked open suddenly slammed shut behind him, the distinct heavy thud of magnetic locks sealing him inside. You're lying, Vance whispered, his gun shaking violently as he aimed at Malcolm's head. You're a cornered rat trying to talk his way out of a cage. I'll shoot you right now. I'll say you went for the gun. You won't shoot, Malcolm said, standing up slowly, towering over the desk. He didn't raise his hands. He just stared Vance down, an immovable mountain of federal authority. Because if you do, my Overwatch sniper puts a .50 caliber armor-piercing round through your spine. Suddenly, 3 tiny, distinct red laser dots appeared on the chest of Vance's black tactical vest, piercing through the tiny gap in the closed steel shutters. Downstairs, the front door didn't burst open. It was simply unlocked remotely. The sound of heavy, synchronized, suppressed footsteps echoed up the stairwell as a 12-man federal Marshal special operations team flooded the ground floor. Over the intercom, Caleb's voice echoed high-pitched and weeping. Vance, they're feds. Vance, put the gun down. They have us. Malcolm stepped around the desk, stopping 2 feet from the trembling barrel of Vance's Glock. The red emergency lights cast demonic shadows across Malcolm's face. You broke into a level 4 federal safe house, Vance, Malcolm whispered, reaching out with agonizing slowness and plucking the gun from Vance's weak, unresisting grip. I am a senior handler for the U.S. Marshals. The woman downstairs is the star witness against the syndicate you work for. You didn't spring a trap on a drug dealer tonight. Malcolm expertly cleared the chamber of Vance's gun, the unspent round clattering loudly onto the glass desk. You just walked into the jaws of the United States Department of Justice, and they are going to swallow you whole. The sterile, ultra-modern living room of the federal safe house had been transformed in a matter of minutes from a quiet suburban sanctuary into a bustling, heavily armed command center. The blinding tactical flashlights of the 12-man U.S. Marshal Special Operations Group cut through the gloom, illuminating the flawless hardwood floors and the expensive minimalist furniture. Officer Vance Keller found himself violently shoved face first onto one of those flawless floors, his cheek pressed painfully against the cold wood. The heavy, unyielding bite of thick plastic zip ties dug into his wrists, cutting off the circulation to his hands. Beside him, huddled in a pathetic shaking ball against the base of a pristine white sofa, was Officer Caleb Dunn. Caleb was sobbing openly, gasping for air as if he were drowning in the absolute ruin of his life. Vance wrenched his neck upward, his scarred face twisting into a mask of feral, desperate rage. He glared at the heavy tactical boots standing inches from his nose. His eyes slowly traveled up the dark tactical trousers, the fitted gray Henley, to the calm, impenetrable face of Malcolm Whitaker. "You think you've won?" Vance spat, blood from a busted lip spraying onto the floorboards. One of the marshals had delivered a swift, brutal butt stroke to his jaw when Vance had tried to resist being disarmed. "You think you can just black bag 2 sworn police officers? I am a decorated veteran of the Blackwood Police Department. When Captain Elena finds out I'm missing, she will tear this city apart looking for me. She will bring the wrath of God down on your arrogant head." Malcolm stood perfectly still, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. The red emergency lighting had been deactivated, replaced by the harsh clinical glare of the overhead LEDs. It offered no shadows for Vance to hide in. It laid his corruption bare for the world to see. "The wrath of God," Malcolm murmured, his voice a low, resonant rumble that commanded absolute silence in the room. Even Caleb's sobbing momentarily hitched in his throat. "Vance, you don't even understand the theology of the situation you're in. You are a dirty street cop who takes bribes from a local syndicate. You plant evidence on innocent people to satisfy your fragile racist ego. You aren't God's wrath. You are a cockroach that just crawled onto an anvil, entirely unaware of the hammer hovering above you." Malcolm crouched down, bringing his face level with Vance's. The absolute lack of anger in Malcolm's eyes was the most terrifying thing Vance had ever seen. It was the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. "Let's talk about Captain Elena," Malcolm said, his voice dropping to a conversational murmur. "Do you honestly think she cares about you? You are a disposable asset. You were sent here to secure a fictitious floor safe full of Joshua's cash, and you were meant to take the fall if anything went wrong. She set you up, Vance." "You're lying," Vance hissed, his breath ragged. "She gave me the tip. She told me about the fentanyl." "Ah, yes, the fentanyl." Malcolm stood up, snapping his fingers. A towering marshal in heavy tactical gear stepped forward, carrying the duct-taped brick of fake narcotics Vance had brought into the house. The marshal dropped it onto the glass coffee table with a heavy thud. Malcolm reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, sleek audio recorder. He pressed a button. Instantly, the crystal-clear audio of Vance and Caleb in their idling police cruiser filled the room. "This is the score that gets us out of the mud. You want to spend the next 20 years scraping drunks off the pavement? Or do you want to retire to a beach in Bora Bora with a duffel bag full of untraceable hundreds?" Vance's eyes widened in horror. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. The audio continued, playing every damning word, every threat Vance made against Caleb, every mention of Joshua's syndicate, every detail of their plan to plant the drugs and steal the money. "How?" Vance croaked, his voice cracking. "My jammer, the car." "Your car has been bugged for 6 weeks," Malcolm replied smoothly, pacing slowly around the 2 captive men. "Your phones have been cloned. We have had aerial surveillance on your movements, financial audits of your offshore betting accounts, and direct wiretaps on your conversations with Joshua's lieutenants. You thought you were hunting me. You didn't realize I was merely the bait dragging you out of the tall grass so I could cut off your head." Malcolm stopped pacing and turned his attention to the weeping rookie. "Caleb," Malcolm said gently. The sudden shift in tone from surgical menace to almost paternal empathy was jarring. Caleb flinched, curling tighter into a ball, refusing to look up. "I'm sorry," he whimpered. "I'm so sorry. He made me do it. I have a baby coming. He said he'd ruin me." "I know he did," Malcolm said, crouching beside the younger officer. "I know about your wife's medical bills. I know about the threats Vance made against your career. I know you are a desperate man who made a terrible, cowardly choice. But right now, Caleb, you have an opportunity to make a brave one." Malcolm pointed a finger at Vance, who was glaring at Caleb with murderous intent. "If you stay loyal to him, you will be charged with armed home invasion, attempted murder of a federal agent, evidence tampering, and racketeering. You will spend the rest of your life in a maximum security federal penitentiary. You will never see your child born. You will never hold your baby." Caleb let out a raw, agonizing wail, his forehead resting against his bound wrists. "But," Malcolm continued, his voice hardening slightly, "if you give me a full recorded confession right now, if you detail every bribe Captain Elena took, every hit Joshua ordered that Vance covered up, and every piece of planted evidence in your precinct, I will personally guarantee you federal immunity. You will lose your badge, but you will keep your freedom. You will go home to your wife tonight." "Caleb, don't you dare," Vance screamed, thrashing violently against his restraints. "You shut your mouth. They're bluffing. You say one word and Joshua will butcher your entire family." "Gag him," Malcolm ordered without looking away from Caleb. A marshal immediately stepped forward, roughly pulling Vance's head back and securing a heavy strip of black tactical tape over his mouth. Vance's screams were reduced to muffled, furious grunts. Malcolm looked back at Caleb, his eyes unwavering. "Joshua's empire is falling tonight. Vance is already a ghost. The only question left, Caleb, is whether you are going to haunt the same graveyard or if you want to live. 5 seconds." Caleb looked up. His face was stained with tears and mucus, his eyes wide with desperate terror. He looked at the muffled, thrashing form of his partner, the man who had dragged him into hell. Then he looked at Malcolm. "I'll tell you everything," Caleb choked out, his voice trembling. "I'll give you Elena. I'll give you Joshua. Just please, please let me see my wife." Malcolm nodded slowly, a grim satisfaction settling over his features. He stood up, looking down at Vance, whose eyes were bulging with impotent rage behind the tape. "Checkmate," Malcolm whispered. "Load them into the transport. We have a precinct to burn." Captain Elena Thorpe sat behind the massive oak desk in her private office, swirling a measure of 20-year-old Macallan Scotch in a crystal tumbler. The Blackwood Police Precinct was quiet at 2 a.m, save for the low hum of the HVAC system and the occasional muffled ring of a desk phone in the bullpen downstairs. Elena was a striking woman in her late 40s, her uniform impeccably tailored, her hair pulled back into a severe commanding bun. She was the picture of authoritative grace, a pillar of the community who had built her career on a foundation of tough-on-crime rhetoric. Beneath the polished veneer, however, Elena was deeply, irredeemably rotten. She was the highest-paid asset on Joshua's payroll, the master puppeteer who ensured that the syndicate's shipments moved through Blackwood without a single police cruiser ever turning its sirens on. She checked her gold Rolex. 2:15. Vance and Caleb should have secured the Whitaker house by now. They should be walking out with the fentanyl charge secured, eliminating the one man in town who had publicly threatened her authority, while simultaneously lining her pockets with whatever cash Joshua had supposedly left behind. It was a perfect, elegant solution. A sudden, deafening crash shattered the silence of the precinct. Elena jumped, spilling expensive scotch onto her pristine desk. The crash was followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy, panicked shouting from the bullpen downstairs. "What the hell?" Elena muttered, slamming the glass down. She stood up, her hand instinctively dropping to the heavy service weapon holstered at her hip. She marched toward her office door, intending to dress down whatever clumsy rookie had knocked over a filing cabinet. Before she could reach the handle, the solid wooden door of her office exploded inward, violently kicked off its hinges. Elena stumbled backward, drawing her weapon in a split second, her heart hammering in her throat. Standing in the doorway, completely filling the frame, was Malcolm Whitaker. He was no longer dressed in the casual Henley. He wore a heavy black tactical vest emblazoned with the bright yellow letters U.S. Marshal. Behind him, the hallway was filled with federal agents in full tactical gear, their submachine guns raised, sweeping the area. The sounds of the local precinct cops being disarmed and ordered to the ground echoed loudly from the stairs. "Drop the weapon, Elena," Malcolm said, his voice entirely devoid of the polite deference he had shown her at the town hall 3 months prior. It was the voice of an executioner. "Or my men will paint this beautiful office with your brains." Elena's mind raced, struggling to process the absolute impossibility of the scene before her. Malcolm Whitaker was supposed to be in handcuffs crying about planted fentanyl. Instead, he was leading a federal siege on her precinct. "Whitaker," Elena breathed, her gun wavering as she looked at the laser sights dancing across her chest. "What is the meaning of this? You are assaulting a police precinct. I am the captain. Stand down immediately." "You aren't a captain anymore, Elena." Malcolm stepped into the room, his boots crunching over the splintered wood of the broken door. "You are a federal inmate. Drop the gun." Reluctantly, agonizingly, Elena opened her fingers. The heavy Glock clattered to the floor. A marshal instantly stepped past Malcolm, kicked the weapon away, and roughly forced Elena's hands behind her back, securing them with heavy steel cuffs. "You have no jurisdiction here," Elena snarled, struggling against the marshal's grip, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "You have no warrant. Whatever you think you're doing, my lawyers will have you stripped of your badge and thrown in a cell by sunrise." Malcolm casually walked over to her desk, glancing at the spilled scotch and the expensive crystal. He pulled out his tablet and dropped it onto the desk blotter. He tapped the screen. A video file began to play. It was a recorded feed from a small, dimly lit room. On the screen, Officer Caleb Dunn was sitting at a metal table, weeping uncontrollably as he spoke into a microphone. "Captain Elena gave the order. She told Vance to use the confiscated fentanyl from the evidence lockup. She said she wanted Whitaker ruined because he embarrassed her. She gets 20% of every shipment Joshua runs through the port. She uses a shell company in Panama to hide the money. The account number is..." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The color drained from her face, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. The arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by the hollow, panicked look of a trapped animal realizing the snare had finally snapped shut. "Caleb gave us everything," Malcolm said softly, leaning over the desk to look her dead in the eye. "He gave us the account numbers. He gave us the dates of the meetings. He even told us about the burn phone you keep in the false bottom of your middle desk drawer." Malcolm reached out effortlessly, yanking the middle drawer open. He pressed his fingers against the wood, finding the hidden latch, and pulled up the false bottom. Sitting perfectly in the hidden compartment was a cheap, disposable prepaid cell phone. "You're done, Elena," Malcolm whispered, holding the phone up. "The FBI is currently seizing your assets. Your offshore accounts are frozen. Vance is in federal custody, and you are going to prison for the rest of your miserable, corrupt life." Elena's knees buckled. If the marshal hadn't been holding her up, she would have collapsed to the floor. The gravity of her ruin crashed down upon her all at once. She was going to lose her pension, her power, her freedom. She would be thrown into a federal penitentiary filled with the very people she had spent her career locking up. She would be hunted every single day. "Wait!" Elena gasped, her voice shrill with sudden, overwhelming desperation. "Wait, Whitaker. Malcolm, listen to me. I can make a deal. I can give you Joshua. The real Joshua, not just the street lieutenants." Malcolm paused, raising an eyebrow. "We already have Joshua. The star witness is safely secured, ready to testify against him on RICO charges. You have nothing I need, Elena." "You don't understand," Elena screamed, thrashing against her cuffs, her eyes wild. "Joshua knows about your witness. He has a mole deep inside the FBI field office. The mole gave him the location of the safe house. Vance wasn't just sent to plant evidence. Joshua paid me to send Vance there tonight as a distraction." "The jammer!" Elena cried out, tears of panic streaming down her face. "Vance's jammer wasn't just to block your outgoing signals. It was designed to temporarily blind your external thermal sensors. While you were focused on Vance breaking in, Joshua's real team was moving into position. A private mercenary squad. They aren't there to arrest you, Whitaker. They're there to slaughter everyone inside and burn the house to the ground." Malcolm shoved Elena back, his heart slamming against his ribs. He tapped his earpiece frantically. "Vanessa, this is Handler 1. Come in." Static. Only thick, unbroken static hissed back at him. The hardwired comms line had been severed. "Vanessa, report!" Malcolm shouted, sprinting out of the office, leaving the disgraced captain sobbing on the floor. The trap hadn't just been for the corrupt cops. The trap had been for Malcolm, and he had walked his team right into it. The rain had stopped, leaving the suburban streets of Oak Creek blanketed in a heavy, suffocating fog. The sprawling $10 million safe house sat in the darkness, a brutalist fortress of slate and concrete. From the outside, it looked perfectly peaceful. But 3 blocks away, perched on the roof of a commercial building, Vanessa was fighting for her life. She had been looking through the massive thermal scope of her anti-material sniper rifle, providing overwatch for Malcolm when the encrypted comms line had suddenly gone dead. A second later, the heavy steel access door to the roof was blown entirely off its hinges by a shaped C4 charge. 4 men dressed in advanced unmarked urban combat gear flooded the roof, moving with terrifying silent precision. These weren't street thugs. These weren't corrupt beat cops like Vance. These were Tier 1 operators, ex-military contractors bought and paid for by Joshua's limitless syndicate wealth. They had suppressed short-barreled rifles, night vision optics, and a single unified objective: eliminate the overwatch, breach the safe house, and execute the witness. Vanessa didn't hesitate. She abandoned the heavy sniper rifle, drawing her customized Glock 19X and diving behind a heavy industrial HVAC unit. Just as a hail of suppressed gunfire chewed the concrete where she had been lying a fraction of a second before, she popped out from the side of the unit, firing 3 rapid, perfectly aimed shots. 2 rounds struck the lead mercenary center mass, dropping him to the roof. The other 3 immediately fanned out, laying down a punishing wall of suppressive fire that pinned Vanessa behind the churning metal of the air conditioner. "Handler 1, my position is compromised. Multiple bogeys, heavy contact," Vanessa screamed into her secondary radio, praying the encrypted burst transmission would punch through whatever localized jamming they were using. Back at the safe house, the 4 federal marshals left behind to guard the perimeter suddenly realized they were under siege. The heavy, reinforced glass of the front bay windows didn't shatter. It was ballistic, but it spiderwebbed violently as a massive armor-piercing round slammed into it from the tree line across the street. "Contact front!" one of the marshals roared, flipping over the heavy marble dining table to use as cover. Suddenly, the front door, the same heavy steel door that Malcolm had smugly told Vance was impenetrable, groaned violently. A magnetic breaching charge had been attached to the exterior hinges. Boom! The door was blown entirely out of its frame, slamming into the foyer with the force of a freight train. Smoke and dust choked the air. Through the breach stepped 3 figures in heavy ballistic armor carrying fully automatic assault rifles. A brutal close-quarters firefight erupted in the pristine living room. The deafening roar of unsuppressed gunfire tore through the house, shredding the expensive artwork, destroying the minimalist furniture, and filling the air with the sharp, acidic smell of cordite and blood. Deep beneath the house in the subterranean bunker, Sophie was violently thrown from her cot as the shockwave of the breaching charge reverberated through the concrete foundation. The red emergency lights flickered, casting long, nightmarish shadows across the tiny room. She scrambled to the corner, pressing her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. She could hear the muffled, terrifying staccato of automatic weapons firing directly above her head. Malcolm had told her she was safe. He had told her it was over, but Joshua had found her. Above her, the marshals were fighting valiantly, but they were severely outgunned. The mercenaries were using flashbangs and advanced room-clearing tactics, systematically pushing the marshals back toward the basement stairwell. 2 miles away, Malcolm Whitaker was driving his black SUV like a man possessed. The massive engine roaring as he tore through the wet city streets at over 100 miles an hour. His knuckles were bone white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. "Hold on, Vanessa," Malcolm whispered to himself, the tires screeching agonizingly as he drifted the heavy vehicle around a tight corner, hurtling toward the affluent neighborhood. "Just hold the line, I'm coming." The suffocating fog swallowed the commercial district, but on the roof of the parking structure, a chaotic symphony of survival played out. Vanessa was pinned behind a churning HVAC unit by 3 heavily armed Tier 1 mercenaries. She had 21 bullets left. A flashbang bounced near her boots. Bang. Blinded and deafened, pure instinct took over. She swung her Glock around the corner, firing blindly, winging one attacker. But the massive lead mercenary rounded the unit, his suppressed rifle aimed right at her face. Before he could fire, a matte black SUV smashed through the steel security gate below, its engine roaring. The screech of tires distracted the mercenary for a split second. It was all Malcolm needed. Vaulting over the roof's concrete lip from the fire escape, Malcolm fired two rapid, perfectly placed shots from his Sig Sauer, dropping the lead mercenary instantly. The remaining two pivoted, but Malcolm sprinted into a combat role, drawing their fire. "Go!" he roared to Vanessa. She burst from cover, sprinting for the shattered roof access door. When a mercenary shifted his aim to track her, Malcolm stepped out and fired a single devastating shot, dropping him. The final mercenary threw a smoke grenade and fled down the fire escape. Malcolm didn't chase him. He looked down at the affluent neighborhood, seeing the violent flashes of muzzle fire illuminating his $10 million home. "It's a war zone down there," Vanessa breathed. Malcolm reloaded, his jaw set. "They threaten my witness. It's time to show Joshua's army why the government pays me." The safe house's pristine interior was shredded by high-velocity lead. 4 surviving U.S. Marshals fiercely held a defensive line at the top of the basement stairwell, running low on ammunition. Below, a 5-man mercenary team had set up heavy ballistic shields. Behind them, a specialist operated a roaring thermal lance, melting through the titanium locking mechanism of the panic room. Inside, Sophie huddled in the suffocating heat, terrified. "Hold the line," roared the lead marshal. "If they breach, the witness is dead." Suddenly, Malcolm's voice crackled over the marshal's earpieces. "Alpha team, maintain barricade. Cover your ears and close your eyes on my mark." Malcolm and Vanessa hadn't used the shattered front door. They emerged from a subterranean service tunnel directly behind the mercenary breaching team. Malcolm raised a heavy combat shotgun. "Mark!" Malcolm fired directly into the massive pressurized oxygen tank strapped to the thermal lance operator. The explosion was catastrophic, ripping through the confined hallway and shattering the mercenaries' ballistic shields. Before the ringing stopped, Malcolm and Vanessa moved through the smoke like apex predators, neutralizing the remaining disoriented attackers with ruthless efficiency. The corridor fell deathly silent. Malcolm stepped up to the glowing titanium door, manually overriding the maglocks. The door swung open to reveal a tear-stained Sophie. "You're safe now," Vanessa said, wrapping a jacket around the trembling witness. Malcolm pulled his encrypted phone, reporting to the director of the U.S. Marshals. "Witness is secure. Evac is clear." "Great work, Malcolm. Stand down and await extraction." Malcolm looked at the carnage. "Negative, Director. I'm going off book for 3 hours. I have a loose end." The penthouse suite of the Obsidian Tower in the heart of downtown Blackwood was a monument to untouchable wealth and criminal power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, godlike view of the sprawling city below. The floors were polished Italian marble. The furniture was imported and obscenely expensive. Joshua, the architect of the region's largest criminal syndicate, stood by the window swirling a glass of incredibly rare bourbon. He was a man in his late 50s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a bespoke silk suit. He didn't look like a gangster. He looked like a Fortune 500 CEO. He checked his diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch. 4:15 a.m. His mercenary team should have reported in an hour ago. The silence was beginning to fray his normally unflappable nerves. He had spent millions orchestrating this night, paying Captain Elena to send her corrupt attack dogs, Vance and Caleb, to the house to trigger the federal alarms and create a distraction, hiring the absolute best Tier 1 operators to bypass the blinded sensors and execute the accountant who could put him in prison for 3 lifetimes. It was a masterpiece of misdirection, but the silence was deafening. Joshua walked over to his massive mahogany desk and picked up his encrypted satellite phone. He dialed the frequency for the mercenary squad leader. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Click. "Report," Joshua snapped, his voice sharp and impatient. "Is the accountant dead? Is the house burning?" "The house is burning, Joshua." A deep, resonant, terrifyingly familiar voice echoed through the speaker. But your accountant is currently on a Black Hawk helicopter headed to a federal black site in Virginia. Your strike team, however, is being zipped into body bags as we speak." Joshua's blood ran ice cold. The crystal glass slipped from his fingers, shattering into 100 pieces on the marble floor, splashing expensive bourbon across his expensive shoes. "Whitaker," Joshua breathed, the name tasting like poison on his tongue. "You made a critical miscalculation, Joshua." Malcolm's voice was a low surgical scalpel slicing through the encrypted line. "You thought throwing corrupt cops and expensive mercenaries at my front door would overwhelm me. You treated this like a chess game. You sacrificed your pawns to take my queen. But you forgot one thing. You're a dead man, Whitaker," Joshua snarled, his panic morphing into desperate, venomous rage. He slammed his hand down on the red panic button on his desk, designed to summon his heavily armed security detail waiting in the hallway outside his suite. "I will put a bounty on your head so high that your own mother will put a bullet in you." Nothing happened. The heavy oak doors of his penthouse didn't burst open. His security team didn't rush in. "The panic button is disconnected, Joshua," Malcolm said softly. Joshua froze. Slowly, agonizingly, he turned around. Sitting in the shadows of the massive plush leather sofa in the corner of the penthouse, barely visible in the dim ambient light of the city below, was Malcolm Whitaker. He was still wearing his blood-spattered tactical vest. He held a suppressed Sig Sauer loosely in his right hand. He had bypassed the building's state-of-the-art security, slipped past the armed guards in the lobby, and neutralized the 4 men standing outside Joshua's door without making a single sound. He was a ghost. "How did you get in here?" Joshua whispered, taking a trembling step backward until his back hit the cold glass of the window. For the first time in his life, the kingpin felt the paralyzing, suffocating grip of absolute helplessness. "I walked," Malcolm replied calmly, standing up. He dropped the satellite phone onto the sofa. "Your empire is built on arrogance, Joshua. You believe money makes you a god. You bought a police captain. You bought street cops like Vance Keller to do your dirty work, letting them ruin innocent lives to line your pockets. You thought you were untouchable." Malcolm closed the distance, stopping 3 feet from the trembling kingpin. "But karma isn't a mystical force, Joshua. Sometimes it's just a man in a tactical vest who is entirely sick of your existence." Joshua raised his hands, his arrogant facade completely shattering. "Malcolm, wait. Name your price. I have offshore accounts you don't even know about. I can give you $50 million right now in untraceable cryptocurrency. Just let me walk to my private elevator. You never saw me." Malcolm looked at the pathetic, begging man before him. He thought about Officer Vance sitting in a federal holding cell, his life ruined by the corruption Joshua had fostered. He thought about Sophie, traumatized and terrified, running for her life. Malcolm didn't raise the gun. He simply reached into his tactical vest, pulled out a pair of heavy steel federal handcuffs, and tossed them onto the mahogany desk. "Put them on," Malcolm ordered, his voice echoing with finality. "What?" Joshua stammered. You aren't going to kill me?" "Killing you is easy," Malcolm said, his eyes utterly devoid of mercy. "Killing you lets you escape the consequences of your life. No, you're going to stand trial. Sophie is going to sit on the witness stand and detail every single penny you stole, every life you ruined, and every bribe you paid. You are going to be stripped of your wealth, your power, and your dignity in front of the entire world." Malcolm stepped closer, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You are going to spend the next 40 years in a concrete box measuring 6 feet by 8 feet in ADX Florence. You will have exactly 1 hour of sunlight a day. You will die alone, forgotten, and entirely powerless. That is your karma." Joshua stared at the steel cuffs on the desk. He looked at the cold, immovable mountain of justice standing before him. He realized with absolute crushing certainty that his reign was over. His empire had burned down in a single night because he knocked on the wrong door. With shaking, defeated hands, the kingpin reached out, picked up the cold steel, and locked himself into his own personal hell. The storm over Blackwood had finally passed. The federal hammer had fallen, and Malcolm Whitaker vanished back into the shadows. A ghost once more. What a terrifying, explosive ending. Joshua's limitless arrogance ultimately became his absolute downfall, proving that no amount of money or corrupt cops can protect you when true. Uncompromising karma comes knocking. Malcolm Whitaker didn't just survive the trap, he dismantled an entire criminal empire in a single night, leaving Vance, Elena, and Joshua exactly where they belong, powerless and behind bars. That is the definition of hard karma. If you were on the edge of your seat during this intense ride, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more dramatic, twist-filled, original stories every single week. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a satisfying tale of justice. And let me know in the comments what you would have done if you were in Officer Caleb's shoes. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next incredible one.